When I refused to pay thousands to join the HOA, they thought they could teach me a lesson. They didn't know the Lamborghini they torched belonged to someone who could put them behind bars. I'm not just a car owner. They set fire to a state, troopers' property. And trust me, justice was coming fast. I moved into the neighborhood for peace. Tucked behind rows of identical gates and meticulously trimmed hedges, the community looked like the perfect escape from the chaos of the city. Every house was a variation of suburban perfection, modern, pristine, and lined with imported trees, and flawless driveways. It was the kind of place where people smiled too wide, lawns looked like golf courses, and garbage bins never sat out past the collection hour. I wasn't fooled by the presentation, though. I'd seen enough in my line of work to know when something was too polished to be natural. It didn't take long before the welcome wagon arrived. 3 members of the Homeowners Association, clipboard in hand, all business behind their polite grins. They stood on my doorstep like door-to-door salesmen, trying to convince me that joining the HOA was not just a responsibility, it's a privilege. They handed me a thick binder filled with bylaws, fees, and penalties for violations that ranged from fence height to the brand of fertilizer used on your lawn. I flipped through it with a smirk. Their annual fee was outrageous, especially for a neighborhood that didn't offer anything beyond basic maintenance. No clubhouse, no gym, no gated security patrols, just a group of overreaching volunteers who liked pretending they had power. When I declined, they didn't take it well. First came the fake understanding, the "we'll give you time to reconsider" speech. Then came the follow-ups. Notes slipped into my mailbox, emails. Even one awkward encounter at the grocery store where one of them cornered me near the produce section to remind me that non-compliance could lead to unfortunate misunderstandings. I didn't respond. I wasn't interested in paying people to monitor how long my garage door stayed open or what color my mailbox flag was. I kept my property clean, my grass trimmed, and my home in perfect condition, better than half the houses on the block. Still, they kept pushing, like vultures circling a fresh kill. Things began to shift subtly after that. The friendly waves from neighbors turned into blank stares. One morning, I found my garbage can tipped over and dragged halfway down the street. A few days later, my mailbox was bent at an odd angle, like someone had kicked it. At night, porch. Lights would flicker on as I walked past. Conversations would quiet when I stepped into earshot. And through it all, the HOA remained silent. No official letters, no direct threats, just the growing sense that something was boiling beneath the surface. I knew intimidation when I saw it. This was the same passive-aggressive energy I'd encountered in interrogation rooms, just wearing polo shirts and pearls instead of handcuffs. It didn't help that they fixated on my car. A sleek, matte black Lamborghini Huracan, custom-wrapped and purring like a beast every time I rolled through the neighborhood. It was more than a car, it was a statement. One I knew annoyed them deeply. It didn't fit their aesthetic. It was too loud, too aggressive, too mine. Twice I caught someone taking photos of it from across the street. Another time, I noticed a chalky substance smeared near the tailpipe. I started checking it thoroughly every morning before driving. I moved it into the garage each night and installed a high-end security camera, though I suspected it wouldn't deter them for long if they really wanted to escalate. A week later, a formal notice appeared taped to my front door. Not from the city, not from the police. From the HOA. It accused me of violating community standards, parking a commercial-grade vehicle in a residential zone. Laughable, considering I'd seen at least 2 lifted trucks with sponsor decals in other driveways. But those trucks belonged to card-carrying HOA members. That was the difference. I sent a short reply. Not interested. Again. Then I started documenting everything. Every incident, every passive threat, every subtle act of vandalism. I kept backup files on 2 separate devices, not because I was afraid, but because I knew how people like this operated. Bullies with bylaws. They poked and prodded until someone either broke or fought back. By now, I was convinced it wasn't just about the money or the rules. It was about control. The HOA couldn't stand that someone had moved in who didn't play by their script, who didn't flinch when pressured, who didn't bow to a hierarchy built on fake authority. And the more I stood my ground, the more they seethed behind those forced smiles and manicured lawns. My neighbors whispered. The ones who once waved now watched from behind curtains. I could feel it building, something bigger than warnings or vandalism. The calm before the storm. They thought I was just another guy with an attitude and a fast car. They didn't realize I had a badge and a very long memory. The first note appeared on my windshield 3 days after I declined the HOA's second demand letter. Folded neatly under the wiper, the paper was crisp, thick, and scented like the kind of overpriced perfume you'd expect from a suburban mom with too much time and too little accountability. No name, no signature, just 4 words written in. Blocky, shaky handwriting. You're not welcome here. I stood in the driveway for a full minute just staring at it. My gut told me it wasn't a prank. It didn't have the casual edge of a joke or the sloppiness of a teenager trying to be edgy. This was deliberate, calculated, threatening. I crumpled it, tossed it in a drawer inside, and added it to my growing collection of documentation. 2 days later, I came out to find a fresh, jagged scratch running along the passenger side of the Lambo. Not a random scrape. This was precise, intentional, as if someone had walked the entire length of the car with a key pressed hard into the paint. Matte black slashed through with silver like a wound. I reviewed my security footage, but the angle had missed the incident by inches. The culprit must have known, or guessed. Either way, it was a message. I filed a police report out of formality, but I didn't expect much. The officer who came out to take the report was polite, but indifferent. He gave me the usual spiel. No cameras, no witnesses, no fingerprints, no case. I could almost see it in his eyes. Just another guy with a fancy car and a chip on his shoulder. I didn't press. There were ways to handle this that didn't involve paperwork. That same evening, I took a walk. Not because I needed the exercise, but because I wanted to see who would look me in the eye. The sun was dipping low, casting that golden hue that made the neighborhood look like a movie set. Sprinklers hissed, lawn mowers hummed in the distance. And yet, every person I passed either looked away or offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach their eyes. At one house, a woman watering her roses froze when she saw me coming. She turned off the hose and retreated inside, leaving the water pooling at her feet. A man across the street who was usually out washing his truck disappeared, behind his garage door the moment I stepped onto the sidewalk. It was like the entire neighborhood had silently agreed to pretend I didn't exist, or worse, that I wasn't supposed to be here at all. That night, the second note arrived. This one wasn't left on my car. It was slid through my mail slot. No envelope. Just another scrap of paper with 5 words this time. Sell the car, or else. I didn't flinch. If they thought threatening my car would scare me, they didn't know who they were dealing with. I'd seen bigger monsters, taken down worse. These people were amateurs playing mafia with manicures and lawn chairs. Still, I added the note to the folder and printed off a few extra camera angles, just in case. The tension escalated quickly after that. My garbage bins were overturned 3 nights in a row, always between 2 and 3 a.m. I started finding nails scattered in my driveway, carefully placed, not spilled. The HOA sent another letter, this one accusing me of violating a noise ordinance for revving an engine aggressively during daylight hours. They even cited a decibel range. I almost laughed. I never revved the engine. I didn't need to. The car purred on its own, like a predator barely restraining itself. One morning, I caught a man standing too close to the car. Middle-aged, paunchy, wearing a bright HOA volunteer badge like it was a sheriff's star. He pretended to be admiring it, but his eyes gave him away. Too focused, too calculating. When, I stepped out onto the porch and called out. He didn't flinch, just nodded, smiled tightly, and walked off without a word. It was that afternoon when an old man I'd never spoken to before approached me. I'd seen him a few times walking his dog, an ancient golden retriever who moved slower than molasses in winter. He lived 3 houses down near the corner and mostly kept to himself. But that day he stopped at the edge of my driveway, glanced around, and said quietly, "You might want to move your car into the garage from now on." I raised an eyebrow. "Something you know?" He hesitated, then gave a tired sigh. "These people, they don't take no well, especially from someone who doesn't bend." He didn't wait for a reply, just gave a slight nod and shuffled off. I stood there for a long time after he left, watching the sun dip below the roof lines and cast everything in shadows. The signs weren't subtle anymore. They weren't hiding the hostility. They were escalating it. And from the looks of it, I was the only one still standing in their way. They wanted obedience, silence, submission. Instead, they were about to get a storm. The explosion came at 2:47 a.m. It wasn't the kind of sound you sleep through. It shattered the silence like a bomb, rattling windows and setting off every car alarm on the street. I was already halfway out of bed by the time the second blast followed, smaller but deeper. The sound of glass giving way and metal melting in protest. My instincts kicked in before my thoughts could catch up. I grabbed the emergency flashlight, rushed to the front window, and pulled back the curtain. The Lamborghini was on fire, not just smoking or smoldering, engulfed. Flames danced across the hood and roof like a wild performance, orange and white arcs twisting into the air, illuminating the street with flickering chaos. Black smoke poured upward in thick, greasy columns, swallowing the stars and staining the sky. The fire was alive, hungry, and unapologetic. I didn't panic. I just watched. A crowd was already forming, silhouettes in pajamas and robes, phones out, faces lit by the glow of destruction. None of them moved to help. They didn't call out, didn't run for hoses, didn't bang on doors in alarm. They just watched, like an audience at a show they'd waited weeks to see. A few of them even smiled. Others held their phones high, recording with the detached enthusiasm of someone filming a fireworks show. This wasn't fear. This was celebration. The flames cracked louder as the tires burst, rubber popping like gunfire. Shards of glass flew from the windshield, hitting the ground with a hiss. The paint peeled away in bubbling sheets, and the once flawless matte black exterior now looked like it was bleeding. The smell of burning fuel, plastic, and scorched metal rolled through the neighborhood like a curse. 5 minutes later, sirens wailed in the distance. Too late. When the fire truck finally arrived, it didn't roll in with urgency. It coasted, as if the men inside already knew what they'd find. The firefighters moved fast, but the damage was done. They sprayed down the flames, steam rising in waves as fire met water, but the body was already gutted. The skeleton of the car slumped forward, charred and sagging like it had been in a war zone. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, face unreadable. No one approached me. No one offered condolences. The HOA president, wearing a floral robe and sipping from a ceramic mug, stood at the end of her driveway like a queen surveying a conquered kingdom. She made eye contact, tilted her head slightly, and raised her eyebrows, as if to say, "Still don't want to join?" I didn't blink. The firefighters wrapped up quickly. One approached me afterward, looking uncomfortable. He asked the usual questions. Did I hear anything beforehand? Notice suspicious activity? Any enemies? I gave a polite nod, kept my answers brief. I wasn't ready to talk. Not to him. Not yet. After they left, the crowd lingered for a few minutes longer. Murmured conversations floated through the air like gossip on a breeze. And then, slowly, they all vanished, back into their houses, their curated lives, Their HOA approved. Bubbles. By 3:30 a.m., the street was quiet again. I walked to the wreckage once the fire had cooled enough to get close. The frame was barely recognizable, twisted and blackened. The license plate was warped, hanging by a single bolt. My stomach didn't turn. My hands didn't shake. The anger wasn't hot. It was cold, precise, like steel sharpening in the dark. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd broken me. I went back inside, closed the door, and locked it behind me. Then I turned on the lights, pulled up the files I'd been saving, and made a few phone calls. Not to friends, not to neighbors, to people who wore uniforms, people who didn't care about HOA bylaws or lawn heights. People who had the authority to ask the real questions, get the real answers. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to open the right doors. I already had the footage from my garage cam. It didn't catch the moment the fire started, but it did show a figure walking away seconds before the flames erupted. Hoodie, gloves, backpack, no face, no license plate. But they made a mistake. They walked too close to my neighbor's driveway, right under his camera, the one hidden under the eaves. I'd seen it, and I was betting he didn't have the guts to say no when the police came knocking. This wasn't about the car anymore. This was about principle, about power, about drawing a line and refusing to back down. They wanted to scare me into silence, shame me into leaving. What they didn't know was that they hadn't burned a luxury vehicle. They'd torched the wrong man's patience, and tomorrow they'd find out exactly who I really was. The HOA held their monthly meeting in the clubhouse at the edge of the neighborhood, just past the tennis courts and man-made pond that served as their little crown jewel. The email reminder had gone out like clockwork. 6 p.m., formal attire suggested, bring issues and grievances to the table. The usual bureaucracy wrapped in polite smiles and passive aggression. They had no idea what was coming. I arrived 5 minutes early, not in a hoodie, not in jeans, not behind the wheel of a sports car. I walked in wearing my full state trooper uniform, badged, belted, polished boots, and all. The chatter died the second the door opened. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Paper cups hovered in mid-air. A few mouths literally fell open. It was like dropping a live grenade in a room full of firecrackers. At the head of the table, the HOA president, Deborah, a woman who'd worn her title like armor, tilted her head slightly, clearly unsure whether to smile or pretend she didn't recognize me. I gave her no such luxury. I walked directly to the front of the room, stood tall, and slowly scanned the faces one by one. No one spoke. "I'm here tonight not as your neighbor," I began calmly, "but as a state officer conducting an ongoing investigation into a felony-level act of arson and property damage that occurred just 48 hours ago, within this very community." Gasps rippled through the room like a dropped stone in still water. Some feigned shock. Others looked everywhere, but at me. But there were a few, just a few, whose eyes twitched, whose fingers clenched just a little tighter on the backs of chairs. I mentally noted each one. I've already turned over security footage from my property, but as of this morning, I continued, we've also secured footage from adjacent homes and received court approval to subpoena all relevant community surveillance systems maintained by the HOA. I let that hang in the air like smoke. Deborah found her voice. "Officer, I'm sure we all want justice, but surely this doesn't require attending a neighborhood meeting in full uniform?" I smiled, just slightly. "On the contrary, I figured it was time you all understood exactly who you were dealing with." Her jaw tightened. She didn't like losing control, especially not in front of her carefully groomed kingdom. The whispers returned, hushed but furious. I pulled out a printed photo, a still from one of the exterior security cams. It showed the arsonist mid-step, moments before the fire ignited. I laid it on the table. We've also lifted partial fingerprints from debris found near the burned vehicle. gasoline residue, matched treads, and multiple matching timelines between several HOA members' known locations and the crime scene. We're narrowing the list. I looked directly at Deborah now. Would you like to volunteer your personal phone logs before we ask a judge to request them? She didn't speak. Her face paled. The power she once wore like perfume now clung to her like ash. Behind her, two men exchanged a nervous glance. A woman in the second row shifted uncomfortably and reached for her purse, too quickly. I noted every motion, every fidget. I wasn't here to make arrests tonight, but they didn't know that. Not yet. I'll be meeting with several of you over the coming days, I added, and those who cooperate may be given leniency. However, those found guilty of accessory or obstruction will face full consequences under state law. Panic began to spread in slow, creeping waves. They tried to hide it, but fear isn't something you can bury under manicured smiles. Not when you're used to playing God in your gated community and suddenly realize you've poked the wrong divine figure in the chest. Deborah tried to recover, standing stiffly. We'll, of course, support the investigation however we can. Spare it, I said flatly. This meeting is officially over. And just like that, the illusion shattered. People scattered. Some avoided my gaze completely, slinking out as if their shame had mass. Others stormed out in red-faced indignation, whispering words like lawsuit and entrapment as if they were shields. But the ones who lingered, the ones who waited for the room to clear, those were the ones who knew they were guilty. Their silence screamed louder than any confession. As I exited the clubhouse, the sun was setting. Golden light painted the sidewalks and rooftops in warm, harmless tones. But the warmth didn't reach the people anymore. They'd tried to burn a warning into me. They hadn't realized I carried a badge hot enough to burn right back. And this time, it wasn't my car that was going up in flames. It was their entire little empire. The first arrest happened 3 days later. Jonathan Myers, treasurer of the HOA and self-proclaimed enforcer of community standards, was taken in at 6:15 a.m., still in his slippers, mouth wide open in disbelief. The warrant was airtight, matched fingerprints on the gas can, traces of accelerant on his gloves found in the back of his garage, and cell tower data placing him precisely at the crime scene. No plea, no resistance, just shock. As if he'd truly believed the badge on my chest was for decoration. The others followed quickly. Amanda Brooks, the HOA secretary, tried to claim she had nothing to do with it, until phone records and a cozy little group chat titled HOA Watchdogs showed her cheering on the plan to teach the outsider a lesson. The screenshots were priceless. Smug little emojis, laughter at the idea of seeing smoke before sunrise. Ironies cruel, especially in black and white ink. The biggest surprise came with the arrest of Deborah herself. She wasn't dumb, just arrogant, the kind of arrogance that made her believe she was untouchable. But leadership leaves fingerprints, too. Her name was on every document approving the secret security funds that were funneled through the HOA's reserve account. One subpoena later, we traced it to a $4,000 hardware store purchase. Batteries, wiring, ignition kits. It was supposed to be off the books. Nothing stays off the books when the person reading them has a badge. Local media picked up the story. Within hours. HOA gone rogue, the headlines screamed. News vans lined the street by evening, snapping footage of residents hiding their faces behind mailboxes and dog-walking at record speed. The same people who had smirked at me during neighborhood barbecues now refused to make eye contact. Their little utopia was cracking, and I hadn't even started pressing charges yet. The fire marshal's report classified the act as premeditated, arson with intent to intimidate. That meant mandatory felony time, minimum sentences, no slap on the wrist. Insurance claims were denied across the board for willful acts of criminal conspiracy. That left them not just guilty, but broke. The HOA's legal fund evaporated. Monthly dues doubled overnight to cover penalties and defense costs. Residents rioted, metaphorically at first. Then came the lawsuits. Turns out I wasn't the only one harassed for refusing to comply. One couple had been fined for planting non-regulation flowers. Another woman had her mailbox smashed after, refusing to sign an HOA loyalty pledge. Their stories poured out like water from a cracked dam. What had started with a burning car was now a bonfire of buried resentment. Lawyers circled the neighborhood like sharks at a sinking yacht party. One by one, neighbors started showing up at my door, not with hostility but apologies. Real ones, not the half-hearted PR-style ones. They looked tired, ashamed, regretful. Mr. Klein from across the street, who once called the cops because I parked my motorcycle too loud, stood on my porch and offered me coffee and a handshake. "I didn't know it went that far," he said, voice low. "I should have said something, I'm sorry." I took the coffee. Didn't say a word. Just nodded. Others left notes, some dropped off cookies. A couple even offered to chip in for a new ride. I didn't need the money. That wasn't the point. But I let them try. A week after the last arrest, I stepped out of my house and walked to the driveway. There, parked where the scorched remains of the Lamborghini once stood, was something new. Midnight black, sleek curves, armored interior, and not just horsepower under the hood, legal horsepower behind it. A gift to myself. Custom ordered, untraceable plates. State clearance, a Charger. Hellcat wide body, and mounted discreetly on the front grille, just above the push bar, was a camera. High res, motion activated, always watching, not a symbol of intimidation. A reminder. I slid behind the wheel, engine purring like a warning. As I backed out slowly, I saw curtains flutter in a dozen windows, eyes behind blinds, whispers behind doors. Some people waved, some just watched. They knew now, not just who I was, but what I represented. Not someone to push, not someone to scare off, not someone to burn. I wasn't part of the HOA. I was the line they never should have crossed. If you thought this story was wild, just wait till you hear what happened when another HOA tried to blacklist a war veteran for flying the American flag. Hit that like button if you believe power should never be abused. Subscribe to the HOA Stories for more real, jaw-dropping tales where justice always finds its way, no matter how deep the lies go. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next twist. Because here at the HOA Stories, we don't just tell stories. We expose the truth, one neighborhood at a time.